What's up everybody, Jeff here, and normally I have a policy of not feeding the trolls. But recently an internet bully came at me with some pretty personal attacks, so I think it's time that we prove to him just how wrong he is. Let's get a quick recap before we start.
And it's in exploring my love of nightmare boxes that I discovered who my true friends are. No, who my true enemies are. That's right, Defective Dice, a man who I once thought was my friend. No, my brother, has such a difference in opinion about nightmare boxes, which is why I'm challenging Defective Dice, if that really is in fact your name, to a Malifaux alternate model tier list YouTube video war.
So that's what we're doing. We're going to be doing a tier list of a bunch of the Nightmare and Rotten Harvest boxes that Weird has put out over the years. Now, a couple things to note. We're not taking into account anything that has to do with gameplay when it comes to this tier list. So the fact that the Wild Ones box is not in Guild anymore, irrelevant. The fact that certain boxes might not be super well balanced, or don't comprise the entire crew, or are missing a key model that everybody really likes, not a factor that we're considering here. What we are going to be considering is things like how the models look, the overall theme of the boxes, and what we think of the individual sculpts. Now, myself and Dek worked through a third-party intermediary to pick out the lineup of boxes that we're actually going to be ranking here. And there's two things to note about that. First is we're only going to be ranking the big set boxes. So there's a handful of Nightmare models that you're going to notice are missing from the list here, such as the Nightmare Teddy that came out a couple years back. Any of those unique one-off Nightmare models that just came as an individual, those aren't going to be ranked as part of this. And the second thing is that each one of these sets is going to be ranked as a whole. So for example, a lot of these boxes had secondary boxes that added other models to the theme, like the Darkest Depths box that came alongside the Blood in the Water box. We're going to be ranking those together as a whole, not the individual boxes themselves, because there'd just be too many that way. And now, as is pretty standard, we're going to be ranking them in the tiers S, A, B, C, and D tier, which is called Monument to Mediocrity, which I didn't pick that name, but we're running with it anyway. Alright, so the first thing we're going to look at here is the Rasputina Winter Wonderland box set. And now that I'm actually thinking about it, I don't think this was technically a Nightmare or a Rotten Harvest box, but we put it in the tier list maker, so we're going to run with it. Now I'm kind of torn about this set. I feel like the models are pretty cool, but the theme is just snow things, and I feel like that's a little bit too similar to Rasputina and her existing crew. I kind of like when they deviate a little bit more from the original crews. The Murder Snowmen are pretty okay, but overall I think this crew is probably somewhere in the middle for me, so I'm going to rank it at B tier. Next up we have Toil and Trouble, which is a Zoraida alternate box, and kind of similar to the last one. It's way too close to the original. I feel like Zoraida herself is a cooler version of a witch than this like traditional Halloween type witch. And honestly, it doesn't really do it for me. I think that the pumpkins that it came with are pretty cool, and the toad is actually kind of awesome as a voodoo doll. But the rest of the box is just like blander witches, and it's just not for me. Zoraida's cool. She's got the whole swamp hag voodoo magic vibe going, and she's much creepier and more interesting than this. So I'm gonna go with C tier. All right, Malifaux 1988. So this is an alternate for Mei Fang, which is one of my favorite masters in the game. And if you had told me that there was a cyberpunk 80s sci-fi version of the crew, then I would have told you that that would be absolutely my jam. And this hit most of the way there. The neon lights and rollerblades is not exactly my aesthetic, but I do like the box overall, and I think it's a pretty cool idea. And it's got a big stompy robot in it, and that's definitely my thing. So I think I'm going to give this one an A tier. Alright, next one up is going to be Dead Justice. So this is a box that I actually wasn't even familiar with until relatively recently because it was from back in first edition, and apparently it's super hard to find. And I really like the idea of an undead version of Lady Justice because that's sort of the opposite of what she is, but also she's kind of a necromancer, or used to be. So it's a really interesting idea. The problem for me with this one is that these are first edition metal models, and the metal models were just not the best quality. They were fine for what they were, but a lot of them really show their age if you pick up any of the metal models from first edition nowadays. And I don't want to hold that against it too much because it is a product of its time, and it is a cool idea, but not perfect. I think if they did another version of this today, it would be awesome. It would probably be S or A tier. But for now, I think I'm going to give Dead Justice B tier. The other thing about this one is that most of the crew kind of just looks like a Lady Justice crew. It doesn't really deviate very much from the existing crew, which they're just undead versions of themselves, so I get it, but I think B is fair for them. Alright, next up is Darkest Depths, and this is a box that I'm actually really fond of. So first of all, I'm obviously a huge fan of the lore, and the Darkest Depths is actually creatures from the Gibbering Hordes. So the box actually works for the Gibbering Hordes in the other side, as well as being an alternate for Nekima in Malifaux for the Neverborn. I think that's a really cool idea that it does double duty, but the aesthetic of the crew is also really cool. It looks similar enough to the Gibbering Hordes that you can tell it belongs there, but it doesn't look exactly like any of the existing Horde stuff. So it has that sense of originality, but it also has that overall really cool aesthetic of the Gibbering Hordes. That's one of the coolest armies that I've seen in any game ever. On top of that, the Nekima alternate in the box is called Adiadara. He's actually a canon character in the lore, and there's actually a whole Penny Dreadful for Through the Breach that you can learn more about his character. Not to mention that Adiadara is a Siren, which is a type of Fae that we've not seen very much from in the past, and hopefully is becoming more relevant in the lore as we go forward. So we got awesome aesthetics, we got double duty between both games, and we got really interesting lore tie-ins. This one is for sure going S tier. Alright, the next one we have is It's Alive, which is actually this year's Rotten Harvest box. And I think I might disappoint some of you here, but this one doesn't really work for me. I don't know what it is about the aesthetic. I think this is supposed to be referencing like a cartoon or something along those lines, but I don't love it. I also feel like it's sort of similar in theme to a lot of crews that we already have in Resurrectionist. It's just Frankenstein's monster and these creepy little goblin-looking things. I don't know. I'm not really sure I get it. Maybe somebody could point me in the direction of what this is supposed to be referencing or similar to, but I don't really like the overall aesthetic. I do like Frankenstein. I think that novel's great. Mary Shelley's awesome, but this box doesn't really do it for me. I don't hate it, but it's not really getting me excited, so I'm going to put it in C tier. Oh, speaking of disappointing people. So, Curiosity Killed the Cat. So this is an alternate box for Hamlin, and it's one of the more infamous of these boxes because it is impossible to put together these teeny little cats that come in the box. I don't particularly hold that against the box. Most Malifaux models are difficult to build, but we'll put that aside for now. I think I have two problems with this box. The first one is, I think the idea of a horde of dog-sized rats that are super dangerous and will attack people is really interesting and cool. That's kind of Hamlin and the Malifaux rats' whole thing in the lore. And replacing them with cats just feels less cool. That's kind of already what cats do, aside from the attacking people thing, but I guess if they wanted to, they could kind of be a menace to humans. But I feel like it's interesting the angle that they take on them rats, and just replacing them with cats that are regular cat-sized cats. I don't think it's an improvement over the existing crew. Now, this is one of the few boxes that actually has a story in the lore from Weird Chronicles, which is really cool. But the cat lady and the cats themselves don't really serve a purpose. They're just kind of creepy and scary and are a threat to the characters in the story, but they don't really have any characterization or much to them in and of themselves. I certainly wouldn't expect for us to ever see them again, but maybe. I could be wrong. The other thing is the aesthetic of the crew is a little weird. The models are a little bit busy, which is not usually something I would say about Malifaux models. And by busy, I mean they just have a lot of extra bits that don't really seem to add much to the models. If you want to go look at Chaos Space Marines, those are very busy models. That's what I mean when I'm talking about busy. And I don't think these are as bad as that, but it seems like there's a little too much there. I don't love it. So I think I'm also going to put these at C tier. And I know that's going to break a lot of people's hearts because this is probably one of the more well-liked of the boxes, at least aesthetically, but it doesn't really do it for me. All right, next up is Herald of Obliteration, and this one I think is pretty straightforward because the models in this box are basically just slightly different poses compared to the existing 2nd edition Tarot box. And I like originality in these boxes. I think the coolest thing about the Rotten Harvest and Nightmare boxes is that it gives Weird the opportunity to really go crazy, stretch their creative legs, and do one-off things that are really interesting and unique, and it doesn't have to have a whole story behind it. It doesn't have to be a brand new crew added to the game. And with Heralds of Obliteration, it's really just the rehash of the existing crew. You know, I don't hate it. I actually probably like all the sculpts in this box more than the original crew, at least a little bit. But there's not really much there. It's kind of just the exact same thing. The Nothing Beast is a little bigger. I like Tara's pose a little bit better. I think Karina looks a little bit more sane, which maybe is out of character for her, but fine. So again, I don't hate it, but I just feel like there's not much special about it. It would have been interesting to see them do a completely unique take on Tara and her crew, but we just got some kind of alternate poses, which is fine, but I think we'll put that at C tier as well. All right, next we're going to look at Witches and Woes, which is an alternate box for Pandora, one of the earlier Rotten Harvest boxes. And this kind of has the same problem that I had with Zoraida, where it's just a witch, But I think that the witch in this one has a little bit more character. It's a little bit more interesting to me than the Zoraida alternate. I like the scarecrows in the crew. I think that's pretty cool, and it's not something that we really see except for like with the Carver in Neverborn. And I also think it's a more interesting take because Pandora herself is not just kind of a witch, and this is a different version of a witch. I guess she's technically a witch, but there's a little bit more to her than that. Whereas Zoraida's kind of just a witch, and they just made her a different kind of witch, which I think is less interesting. The other cool thing about this set is that they also did the Candy and Cade alternatives, which I actually like a lot. I think Cade in the teddy bear outfit is really cool. And it's an interesting reference to the relationship that Cade has with Teddy and has had going back as long as I can remember. Plus, they recently put out Iggy in the dinosaur costume, and honestly, if it was just those two models, it would rank much higher for me. But altogether, I think it's somewhere in the middle, so I'm going to put this at B tier. Alright, next up we have Brine and Bones, and before I start, let's just put that right where it belongs at S tier. This is my favorite of all these boxes. So Brine and Bones is an alternate crew for Molly, and this is the first time that one of these boxes came out, and I immediately had to go buy it. Most of the time I've been able to resist, because I have a ridiculous Malifaux collection, so I try not to buy all the alternative boxes, although that's kind of changed now. But when I saw this one, I was immediately like, no, I have to pick this up for sure. I'm a huge fan of Pirates of the Caribbean, and typically skeletons are not my favorite thing, but for some reason pirate skeletons just really do it for me. I also think it's kind of cool because Molly has this whole theme where she attracts the sort of outcasts and misfits to her, and I can see any one of these pirates joining up and hanging out in her crew normally anyway. I think they really nailed it with all the sculpts. I think all the models are really characterful, they're really interesting, good quality, and on top of that, Archie gets a pirate hat, so what more could you ask for? It's great, 10 out of 10, one of the best products Weird has ever put out. The only single criticism I could levy against this thing is that we need another box to go along with it, but like I said at the beginning, we're not going to hold things like that against them, so S tier all the way. Alright, next up we got the Fallen Kingdom set, which is an alt for Hoffman. It came out last year. And I've kind of been going back and forth on this set, but I think I've decided where I want to put it. So this set is really interesting. It's got a kind of traditional fantasy vibe to it with a little bit of like a Dark Souls flavor. And I think the only thing that's keeping me from ranking it higher is that no one model in the box really nails it for me. None of them are 10 out of 10s. There's a lot of 8s, there's a lot of 9s, but none of them are like, I love this model, it's perfect. The dragon is really close. I like the dragon a lot, but there's cooler dragons in this game already. And a lot of the other models are just kind of okay to me. I think Lord Galehalt himself is really cool. I actually like that model a lot, both versions of it. So that's kind of what's pushed me over the edge, and I think I'm going to put this at A tier. I like it a lot, it just doesn't quite get all the way there for me. It's awesome that there's so many models in the set, but a handful of them are just kind of average for me. So overall, A tier I think is a good place for it. Alright, next up we have the Dark Carnival, which is an alternate for Colette's crew. And it's another one that I'm kind of going back and forth about, and I'm not sure where I want to land on it. Overall, I really like the theme of the crew. It's this group of creepy carnies, and I really like that it's got a story that goes along with it from Weird Chronicles. I like that story a lot better than the Cat Lady story. And this is another one that I think I would have probably sought out if I wasn't just an avid collector and picking up most of the stuff anyway. I think the only reason that I'm not super confident about ranking it high is that there's a handful of models in there that don't super do it for me. Baritone Lola is obviously awesome. The flying monkeys are great. The Coryphée are pretty cool. But to me, the mannequins are just kind of Mannequins are already pretty cool in and of themselves, and this isn't really much different than a traditional mannequin. And Thin Lizzy and Mercury are just kind of a pretty lady and a strong dude. It doesn't really do it for me there. I'm not going to penalize the whole set too much for that, but I was kind of going back and forth between A and B tier. I think I'm going to put it A tier because I do really like a lot of the models that are in there. It's just, again, there's a couple that are a little bit more mediocre that kind of holds it back from going higher. Because Cooper himself is kind of just a dude. Not that exciting. I feel like they could have done a little bit more with the carnival theme, but again, really cool crew. I like it a lot, but just not my favorite. Alright, the Wild Ones. So this is an alternate box for Lucas McCabe. And it's another one that's got a pretty strong theme between the models in the box. It's got this kind of Mad Max, cobbled together vehicle, motorcycle-y vibe to it, which I like. It's got a lady with a machine gun, which I definitely like. And it's also got a dog, which is always great. I think the thing that doesn't really work for me in this box is the machines themselves. I like Rollins' bike because it looks like a train a little bit, which is interesting because it's Malifaux and trains are a big thing. But aside from that, it just kind of looks like a motorcycle. And I feel like I would have wanted something a little bit more weird and unique out of the box. The two single-wheeled General Grievous bikes are a little bit more interesting to me, but even those aren't that strange or unique or weird. They're cool, don't get me wrong, but I feel like they're in this weird middle ground where they don't look like real motorcycles and they just kind of are a motorcycle gang, but they also don't look super weird and unusual. They're kind of in the middle somewhere, and I kind of wish they would have picked a direction. Motorcycles are obviously cool, but the direction that I would have chose would have been the weird one. But, but I just feel like it doesn't nail it perfectly. I really like the box, don't get me wrong, but it's just not all the way there for me. Rollins himself is kind of cool. I like the idea that he's got a chain instead of the whip because it goes along with the kind of bike and vehicle motif. So I think I'm still going to go A, but this is probably low A for me. All right, so next up we have the Dia de los Muertos box, the Lady Justice crew from last year, Rotten Harvest, and this is another one that is just automatic S tier for me, no question. This competes with Pirate Molly for my favorite of all of the crews. I'm not sure which, honestly. I think I need to build them both and paint them up and decide later which is my favorite, but this is definitely up there. I think the Day of the Dead aesthetic is really cool, it's really interesting looking. I think the juxtaposition between the super colorful and the sort of morbid skulls and death theme is really beautiful. And I think using that for a Malifaux crew was a great idea, especially for Lady Justice. It would have been really easy to make this a Perdita crew, but that to me would have been way too on the nose. And I think it's both interesting to give a Mexican theme to Lady Justice, but also it sort of ties in with the fact that she's an undead hunter. The Day of the Dead is all about remembering and celebrating lost loved ones, and I think that's something that Lady Justice would appreciate. So for me, this is hitting aesthetically, this is hitting thematically, it's hitting in terms of the characterization of the people it's replacing. All across the board, firing on all cylinders, love it, 10 out of 10, beautiful. All right, here we go. We're going to get spicy. Here is the box that probably kicked off this entire controversy and is the reason we're doing these lists. Unicorn Vomit and Pixie Farts is an alternate box for Ulix and his crew, and I will be putting it at D tier. Now, I'm kind of glad that this one went last because I think a bunch of you probably just closed the video out, but for everybody that's left, let me see if I can explain myself. I think the issue here is that the style of humor that they were going for with this box just doesn't land for me. It's got this like weird absurdist slapstick feel to it that I don't always hate, but it's got to be done really well for me, and I don't think this did it. I like colorful stuff, but there's this concept of the clown fiesta when you're painting miniatures where if you use too many different colors, it can make things look like they're just gaudy and clownish. And for me, this box is that 100%. I think that was intentional, to be fair. I think that was the point, but don't really like it. But I think where this box really falls down the most for me is that the Gremlins are already the comic relief faction in Malifaux. And the interesting thing, like I've mentioned a few times about the Nightmare boxes, is that they're an opportunity to do something weird, something that is just a left turn from the existing crews. And to take a Bayou crew and make a more slapstick comic relief crew out of them just seems like a missed opportunity. It would have been way more interesting to take Ulix and his crew and do something either super serious or dark and brooding, as opposed to going more in the direction that they're already going. Obviously, pigs in the bayou are kind of scary. They eat gremlins, but they're always played in more of a humorous way, where the gremlins get eaten and then they eat the hogs, and it's funny and everybody laughs. And I guess it's true that Ulix is a little bit more of a self-serious character in that he himself is not funny or comical, and he's certainly not entertained by funny and comical things. But to me, if you're going to pick a crew to make funny and ridiculous, it shouldn't be in the faction of the funny and ridiculous stuff. It should be something else. Switch it up a little bit. I guess they were kind of going for a My Little Pony thing here, and I don't know anything about My Little Pony, so maybe if I knew anything about My Little Pony, I would like this better. But to me, there's just nothing appealing about this box. I don't particularly like any of the sculpts. They're fine, I guess. I don't hate it. It's just you have a really strong competition in this lineup, and even the stuff in B and some of the stuff in C tier is stuff that in any other game would be a top tier choice for me. So when you're going up against that kind of competition, for me, this just totally falls flat. I just, don't care. All right, well, if you're still here, then I appreciate you sticking around. We have one last box, and that's Reap and Sow, which is this year's Nightmare box. Now, let me start this off by saying I don't really like ghosts very much. I kind of don't really like undead things very much. I feel like they're overdone, and they tend to be kind of bland and not very interesting. But wait, don't get upset at me yet, because I'm not finished. Hear me out. I generally don't like ghosts, but actually, if there's a company that does ghosts in a way that I do like, it's weird. Karai and her crew I actually find really interesting, and even like the Court of Two are some really interesting looking ghosts, just aesthetically. They have this East Asian kind of Vietnamese flavor to them, and it's much more interesting than what you see in a lot of other games. And honestly, when I saw this box, I was immediately on board. These are much more traditional ghosts, and I think if these same ideas were executed at a lower level, this would probably be a C or a D tier for me. But the problem here is that Weird just nailed it with this box, in my opinion. All of these sculpts are gorgeous. The bell ringers are pretty simple, but they have a lot of detail in the sort of flowing robes. The Stalwart Knight is this really cool ghost coming out of a suit of armor, which kind of reminds me of Izamu a little bit, but it also goes along with Mikhail's whole theme, where he sort of sacrificed his entire life to protect Jedza. The Ghostly Coach and the Skeleton King are both just really cool-looking, unique, interesting models. And to me, if the Fallen Kingdom set has a Dark Souls vibe to it, this one has a little bit more of a Bloodborne vibe to it. It's also kind of cool because thematically it ties in a little bit with Jedza's whole story, because she's sort of this ancient entity that's wandering the earth and is unable to die, and at this point she basically wants to die. And it's interesting to represent her as a ghost or a skeleton, because they're sort of these undead things that can't die themselves. Overall, really cool. I like this box a lot, and I was kind of on the fence between an A tier and an S tier, but I think I'm leaning towards a really high A tier, because at the end of the day, they are ghosts and skeletons, which there are a million ghost and skeleton models out there, and they were extremely well done, maybe the best, most well done I've seen of that type before, but I think I'm going to put it at a high A tier. Alright, that's it for my list. So, what did you think? Do you agree or disagree? Which one of these made you the most upset? Which one of these did you agree with the most? Drop a comment below and let me know. I know this is going to set a lot of people off, but let me just say that it was a ton of fun to do. And keep in mind that all of this is just people's opinions, so if you see opinions in the comments that you really don't like, then be polite to each other. You don't have to come at me to tell me how stupid I am. It's all just about personal preference. And I'm sure there's a million people out there who love the Pixie Farts box and think it's the greatest thing that Weird has ever done. And that's totally fine. I love that you love it. I just don't. Alright, so now that all that's done, how do we resolve all this? Well, if he's not busy bullying other people on the internet right now, then Dek probably put up a video similar to mine at the same time that I did. So what you need to do is go watch his video where he's going to present his own tier list, and then you're going to vote on whose tier list you think is better. There should be a link to a forum down in the description, probably, hopefully. I don't know, I haven't figured that part out yet. So once the voting starts, we're going to give it through Sunday, and then Monday morning we'll announce that I'm the winner and that Dek was wrong. Hey, make sure you watch both of the videos before you vote, because it would be pretty uncool to just watch my video and assume I'm the winner, even though that's obviously what's going to happen. And when you go over to Dek's video, make sure you leave a comment and let him know that I sent you, and tell him that he's wrong. But be nice about it when you do it, because we want to make sure he's the only bully involved in this situation. If you like this video, then don't forget to leave it a like, subscribe to the channel, share it around, check out all the important links in the description. You guys know the deal. And with that, I'd like to give a huge shout out to the Extremely Cool Kids tier on Patreon, the Steam Power Scoundrels, Dogmatized, and Biclops Gladiator Games. And thanks for watching.